Welcome to Lesson 5. In this lesson, we're going to deal with political and legal elements of international business and international marketing. Some of these you might have seen in international business. Other of these can be definitely new. Make sure to read the Porsche case study in the book, which is in the final section. You can check the reading list for the particular page. Let us go ahead and begin. The pestle model is one of our classic models from international business, which helps us to look at different ways that we can examine and analyze the quality and the possibility of moving internationally. In this, we look at the political elements, such as if a country is corrupt, if there's foreign trade policies, economic issues such as economic growth rate and disposable income, social issues such as how fast the population grows or how old the population is, technological incentives or R&D activity, which make up technology aspects, environmental aspects such as how environmental policies work, or are there certain weather or climate issues, and legal issues such as are there discrimination laws. Let's take Colombia. If we look at Colombia, we see that it's a democracy with a medium level of corruption. I know that surprises you, but many people are surprised to hear that Colombia's level of corruption is not that high compared to countries like Indonesia, Paraguay, or Venezuela. Economic issues in Colombia include generally low interest rates, inflation rates that are moderate, social issues like a high population growth rate, and actually a low overall age of the country, which is only about 27.2. Technological aspects in Colombia tend to be difficult because internet is slow and oftentimes not high quality, and there's a lack of money for research and development issues. Weather, if you're dealing with Colombia, you're going to deal with one of the countries with the most rain and water in the entire world. And legal issues, such as a legal system that tends to be slower than most countries in the world. The pestle model dovetails with some of the issues we brought up last week with Porter and the five forces model. But I did want to point out that the five forces model has some significant errors. For me, this blocks the effective usage of the five forces model. These include technology, governments, and something we're going to call black swan events. One of the most difficult features of Porter is that it doesn't really include technology. Porter was writing in the 1970s. I was a child. There were no computers, and very few people had access to internet. The people did either had an enormous amount of money or were connected to the government. The effective usage of the internet didn't really begin until the late 1990s. Porter doesn't really include this in his model. Thus, if we're trying to use the Porter model, when we apply to the pestle model to it, we see that it really doesn't work because it doesn't address technological issues. What does that mean? He didn't really consider the difficulties that arise for people analyzing businesses because of technology, computers, and the internet. Look, for Porter, it's a closed system. You can analyze the world completely, but in the world of internet, you don't know who your competitors are, your suppliers are, your new entrants are, because there's internet and anybody can access your markets. The second issue with Porter is the power of governments. When we look at political forces in the world, governments can create trade wars, like Donald Trump is doing right now to China. For example, you can launch a product in May at $10 a unit, but Donald Trump in June placed a 25% tariff on goods coming from China. So maybe the same product in August ends up being $12.50. This can really screw up your international trade and your international sales. Another thing that can happen is exactly what happened in Colombia. Chavez blocked the border between Colombia and Venezuela. At the time, Colombia was one of the biggest producers of milk for Venezuela. Once he blocked the border, what happened? Milk prices plummeted. I remember milk prices going from almost 3,000 pesos a liter to almost 1,000 pesos a liter in 1 week. Governments can really place an enormous amount of pressure on your products and services. Porter didn't consider that another thing in the Pestle model. The final thing out of the Pestle model that Porter doesn't consider is black swans. Black swans are unexpected events that can happen internationally. For example, an earthquake, a hurricane, a new product or service that nobody saw. This actually comes from a book called The Black Swan by Nicholas Taleb. I strongly encourage you to read it. Now, this happened exactly in Japan several years ago during the Fukushima earthquake. Tokyo Power, who owned those nuclear power plants on the coast of Japan, had considered the possibility of a tsunami, but an 8-meter high tsunami. The tsunami was actually 15 meters. So when the tsunami came to the nuclear power plants, the tidal wave came over the walls, destroyed the walls, and filled the nuclear power plants with water, causing meltdown and destruction. They never considered the possibility that a 15-meter high tsunami would hit the factory. So this creates some difficulties internationally when we try to apply Porter to political, economic, social, technological, environmental, and legal aspects of international marketing. So remember these for the test. What are the problems with Porter? Technology, government, and black swan or unexpected events. Now, when we're trying to look at the different aspects of the political, legal environment, we can look at these in different ways. What's the home country environment? Like, what's the situation in Colombia at this particular situation right now? What's the host country environment? For example, if you were going to export to China, what's the situation in China right now in relationship to Colombia? And then general international information, maybe what the WTO or the OMSA is doing, what's the international inflation rate or growth rate. We will always face barriers or difficulties that we have to surmount when we try to take our products and services internationally. Many of these are political and legal barriers, laws that prevent the trade of money, the trade of certain circumstances, or, for example, legal barriers such as bureaucracy, and these can create extra costs, or they can create delays, or even, the complete dismissal of trade between two countries. Some of the things we need to look at in the home country environment is, are there any promotional activities? For example, in Colombia, you have ProColombia, which helps businesses to promote their products internationally. Are there financial services or information services that you can use to help promote your products and service internationally? Or does the country have a facility with international, advertising, or are there advertising firms in your country? Are there export facilitating activities? One of these would be Federación de Cafeteros. They help farmers export their coffee to international markets. There could be promotion by private organizations such as trade groups or what you would call gremios. And also there could be state trading, because sometimes, like in the case of Ecopetrol, they're state-owned companies and they trade state products internationally. There's different kinds of information we can get in international environments. A great place to look for this is in ProColombia, because they have an enormous amount of databases. The Sabana database system is fantastic, and go to the library and resource it if you want information about international markets. There's great librarians whose job is to absolutely just help you out. That will make their day if you come and ask them questions. So maybe you want some information on individual countries or exports of foreign firms. All that information is in those databases in the library. Now, there's different kinds of political risks, ownership risks, whether or not you can own a particular business or not. Operating risks, such as, is there enough power, or are there enough competent people? And then transfer risks, how do you get the products or services across the border? How do you get money across the border? Could be a big transfer risk. So political risks, you have to remember there's different legal systems. The two major legal systems, and this could be on the exam, would be British common law and the constitutional system, or common law. Colombia has common law. I'm from the United States with British common law. Also, you'll have countries like China that have a unique version of common law based on communism. Is it easy to solve conflicts? Are there licensing or trade secret issues? But also, is there bribery or corruption? Like I said, Colombia is in the middle of the world in bribery, which makes you ask, what is Paraguay like, or Indonesia like, or Equatorial Guinea like, where I used to live? And all I can say is, having lived in some of those countries, it's much worse than Colombia. Now, the political risks can cause a lot of problems. Obviously, they can cause some financial issues, but they can create price controls. For example, in China, I work for EF. We had maximum price controls, maximum prices we could sell the product at. And the reason why is because they only allowed educational companies to make 7% profit on their goods and services because they were a community service. Or, for example, labor restrictions. In Colombia, you don't see many people under 18 working. In the United States, I started working at 13, I think. I started my first formal job at Kentucky Fried Chicken when I was 16. That it's very common in the States to start working much earlier. This changes a lot of issues internationally. Or, for example, if you get pregnant in Norway, a woman who gets pregnant in Norway gets 2 years of leave. In Colombia, I think a woman who gets pregnant gets 3 months of leave. So these can really change the political dynamics can really change how you're going to market your goods and services internationally. Now, one way that we see this is with Venezuela. Venezuela, under Hugo Chavez, nationalized the oil industry and expropriated the supporting companies, the companies that were foreign companies that helped the National Oil Agency produce oil. Some of the companies took Venezuela to court, and specifically in the United States, the Venezuelan branch of the oil industry in the United States is a company called Citgo. Since then, since Hugo Chavez nationalized these companies, companies like Exxon and Phillips and Texaco have taken Citgo to court and are now on the verge of taking over Citgo refineries in the United States. If one country nationalizes something, there may be consequences in a different country because of that nationalization. Another thing that can happen is with HSBC. HSBC stands for the Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Corporation. This was one of the largest banks in the world, and it's called Hong Kong Shanghai because the center of the bank used to be in Shanghai. Until 1947, when the Chinese government took over HSBC and took over all of its assets in China. Since then, HSBC has first operated out of Hong Kong, later out of London, and now I believe they're out of Dubai. They retained the name even though their assets were assumed in China. This is some ideas that you can have. Now we're going to have another lesson in lesson number 5. Please review these for the tests, and thank you for listening.